So, Chris, I understand we're going to begin a series on Ecclesiastes in the coming weeks.
We're going to begin in about 4 weeks' time, and hopefully we will also continue and complete study of Ecclesiastes.
Excellent. So do you think Ecclesiastes is a very relevant book to today, to Christians, to non-Christians?
Yeah, I think it is probably one of the most relevant books for the modern man. Indeed, Leland Rakin says it is the most relevant book in the Bible for the contemporary man because he's asking questions and Ecclesiastes deals with him right where he is. So I'm very excited about studying it.
I guess the traditional understanding has been that Solomon wrote Ecclesiastes. Do you agree with that? Or?
Well, it is very interesting. It begins by telling us that it is the words of the teacher, son of David, king of Jerusalem. And then it tells us that he was wiser than any of the previous kings before him. But if that was Solomon, then there was only David before him. So that's a bit strange. And then it begins with the third person, continues in the first person singular, then ends with the third person. So who wrote it? And I wouldn't be at all surprised if it wasn't someone like Hezekiah who used Solomon's writings to put them together to create this book for the princes and rulers in the kingdom.
So not Solomon himself, but based on his writings. And
it's Solomon's writings, but it's obviously been edited by someone who I think also was a king in Jerusalem.
Right. Oh, I can't read. Sorry. You can edit this out, yeah, Ken. Now, obviously, for any book, structure is very important, isn't it, to getting a correct understanding. Do you think Ecclesiastes falls into a nice structure? Is it difficult to work out, or what's your views on that?
I think it's incredibly difficult to work out. If you look at any commentary on Ecclesiastes, it will have a structure different from every other commentary. It's very, very difficult, but I think there are keys. And one of the reasons of having this discussion is so that we can let people know what the structure is that we're going to be working with, so that I don't have to repeat that every Sunday. So can I tell you a little bit about the structure?
Please do.
It begins in chapter 1, verse 2, with the phrase, meaningless, meaningless, says the teacher, utterly meaningless, everything is meaningless. And then it ends with this in chapter 12, verse 8, meaningless, meaningless, says the teacher, everything is meaningless. So that's like the bookends of the chapter. That's the theme running through. Then I would say the book is in two halves, with the middle being in chapter 6 and verse 9. That's the end of the first section. Indeed, that has been recognized down through for centuries before Christ. They understood that was the middle of the book. So what is it saying? Well, I think we have an introduction of chapter 1. And then we have 6 sections up to the middle of the book. Each of them ends with the same phrase, everything was meaningless, a chasing after the wind. So you can see the first section would be chapter 2, verses 1 to 11, which ends with that. Then chapter 2, verse 12 to verse 17 ends, all of it is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. And then that takes us all the way through to the end of chapter 2. Then chapter 3 to the fourth verse of chapter 4. This too is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Then chapter 4 ends. This too is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. And then chapter 6, verse 9. This too is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. And that phrase doesn't occur again after that, but it seems to end each section. It's all a chasing after the wind.
So that's up to chapter 6.
Yes.
And then from 7 onwards?
Then chapter 6, verses 10 to 12 are an introduction and asks 2 questions. Verse 11 asks the question, how does this profit anyone? What value is there? And then verse 12 asks the question, who can tell him what will happen in the future? And there are these two questions that are asked. One is, what's the value? And the second is, what's the future? And they are then answered with 4 sections each. So from chapter 7, verse 1 to chapter 8, verse 17, it answers the first question, what profit is there? And each section ends with the same phrase, a man can't discover. So chapter 7, verse 14, therefore a man cannot discover anything about his future. The next section takes us up to chapter 7, verse 24. It's as far off and most profound. Who can discover it? And then the same phrase is translated very differently in our English Bible, but not in the Hebrew, at the end of chapter 7. But men have gone in search of many schemes. It's the same phrase, who can discover it? Which takes us right to the end of chapter 8, verse 17, which uses this phrase 3 times. It says, no one can comprehend, man cannot discover, and he cannot really comprehend it. That's the end of this section, is about, is there any profit? Is there any value? The second question was, can anyone know anything about the future? Is answered with 4 sections again, which end with its own phrase. So chapter 9, verse 12 says, no man knows. And then the next section takes us up to chapter 10, verse 15. He does not know. Then chapter 11, verse 2. You do not know. And then finally, and it's really said 3 times again in chapter 11, verse 6. Sow your seed in the morning and at evening. Let not your hands be idle. For you do not know which will succeed, whether this or that, or whether both will do equally well. So that seems to be the structure that's coming through there in the passage. And then you have your introductions and your conclusion. The introduction is all about what does a man gain? Generation comes, generation goes. And it ends, generation coming, the youth born, generation going, the old age, and death. So I think there is a very clear structure there. At least that's the structure we shall be working towards on Sunday evenings.
Excellent. So first half is about chasing after the wind.
Yes.
What does it profit us? It's meaningless. And then who can discover, being the repeated question. And then what was the last one?
What does it profit? What value is there?
What value is there?
And I would say if the first section says this is something, life is something you can't grasp with your hand. It's elusive. And the second half says life is something you can't grasp with your head. It's confusing. And I would say that's how it's described. There are things out there that however much you hold on to, they will, like sand, run through your fingers. And there are things that however much you study them, they will perplex you and it won't make complete sense to you. Interestingly, if that is the right structure, right? If chapter 1 is the introduction, it has 18 verses. And then after that, to chapter 6, verse 9, there are 93 verses. Then chapter 6, verse 10 starts 93 verses up to the end, and then we have a conclusion from chapter 11, verse 6 to the end, which is 18 verses again, which is very interesting. That seems to be a very well-organized structure there.
So it's a mirror structure, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. Yes. And I'm quite excited about getting to grips with what it is saying, not what people want it to be saying. Because if people divide it up in the wrong places, and they're forcing their thoughts upon it, rather than letting it speak to us. Now,
I guess Ecclesiastes is famous for that beginning, that everything is meaningless in the NIV, or vanity of vanities in the King James Version. Surely as Christians we believe life's not meaningless, is it? How do we wrestle with this?
Yes, it's a very difficult word to translate. Actually, the word translated in the New International Version, meaningless, or in the Authorized Version, vanity, is the name of Adam and Eve's son, Abel. The word Abel is the word they translate here as meaningless. I don't think meaningless is a good translation, because everything is not meaningless. The book of Ecclesiastes is not meaningless, and it's telling us that there are lots of things that are not meaningless.
So what does it mean?
Yeah, well, I don't think it means vanity either. And some people say, well, it means absurd. What I think it means is not lasting, not permanent, temporary. So the Apostle Paul talks about our dwelling is temporary, but we look forward to an eternal kingdom. And it's saying the things about this world, they're not lasting, they're not permanent, they're not solid, they're not reliable, they're not the answer, they're temporary. If you hold on to them, they will fail you, they will let you down. But there is something that is an eternal kingdom that we look forward to, which is solid and lasting and eternal. So that's how I would translate this word.
Possibly very meaningful, but it's here and gone, and so we don't look at these things, we look to the eternal things.
Yes, and because we're in a fallen world where things have gone wrong, and things are confusing, and the book of Ecclesiastes says things are twisted, that no one can straighten. And that's the world we live in. It's not straight. And this is why I think it's so important for the modern Christian to study Ecclesiastes, because we believe if we have problems in our family, well, God will sort them out for us. If we have difficulties at work, God will sort it out for us, because God's job is to untwist our life now. And Ecclesiastes says, no, this world is twisted. Our lives are in this twisted world, but we have an eternal inheritance that is not corrupted or twisted or perplexing or contradictory. And in this world, things are twisted, temporary, unreliable, and we have to work out how to live in the world we are in.
And that's where the phrase "under the sun" fits in, is it? That this will focus on this world here.
Yes. People say, well, there's a difference between under the sun and over in the Lord Jesus Christ. But I think the phrase "under the sun" basically means now. This world, here and now, where we live today.
So put it all together, would you say that that is the central emphasis of the book of Ecclesiastes then, is to expect frustration, to expect things to be temporary now, and so to fix our eyes on eternity? Or
yes, and to realize that death is just around the corner, that we are aging, failing, dying in a world that is aging, failing, and dying. I think if I was to give a title to the book of Ecclesiastes, I would take it from Toy Story, where Buzz Lightyear, he doesn't fly, but he's falling with style. And I think Ecclesiastes tells us we're in a world that has fallen. We're fallen people, but we can live for God in a fallen world, falling with style. And I think it's so much is about wealth, about money, about relationships, things that are, the makeup of our everyday life. Now, how do we do that the best way we possibly can? Realizing that we don't know if we'll be alive this time next week. Not knowing if there's going to be earthquakes or whatever this time tomorrow. How do we live right in this twisted, fallen world? And Ecclesiastes gives us the wisdom.
Excellent. Well, thanks very much, Chris, for sharing with us what we're going to be looking at, a sneak preview, as it were. Remind us again how long the series will be. Well,
I think it might take us 4 months, maybe even a little bit longer. But, yeah.
But it's still transitory. It'll be here and then it'll be gone.
That's
so
right.
Better not miss it.
Yes, that's right. If we don't die or the Lord doesn't come before, we hopefully in the next 5 months will have finished Ecclesiastes.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, Stanton. Thank you, folks.